Let's make royal icing. We're going to start with our meringue powder. I use Wilton brand. We're going to start by scooping 6 level tablespoons of meringue powder. We're going to put it right here in our bowl. Okay, so here's my 6 level tablespoons. Over here I have lukewarm water. I find that this dissolves the powdered sugar and the meringue powder a lot better than the cold water, which could cause it to seize up a little bit. So I'm starting with 5 tablespoons of lukewarm water right on top of the meringue powder. We're going to start with our whisk attachment. So meringue powder is a very fine ingredient, so we don't want to put this on high. We're going to start on number 1, very low. So we just want to mix it enough for the meringue powder to get incorporated with the water. So I'm going to let this mix for a couple seconds here. Now I want to take my spatula. I'm going to scrape down these sides, making sure all of this meringue powder is in the water. Now once this is in here, I'm going to turn the speed all the way up. We want to mix this very quickly. And we want to whisk this until we have stiff peaks. So what that does is that activates the meringue powder, which is a very crucial part to having stable royal icing. So this could take a couple minutes, upward of 5 minutes. So I'm going to turn this motor head down and we're going to crank this all the way up until we reach those stiff peaks. Now every mixer is different, so we're looking for the stiff peaks instead of timing it correctly, because your mixer might whip this a lot quicker than mine. And things like room temperature can play a factor in that as well. So we're going to turn this all the way up. And then we're going to look for those stiff peaks. Okay, you can see in the bowl here how our meringue powder was whipped until those stiff peaks. Now what I like to look for is that it's still on the whisk. So you can see that it clung to the whisk attachment and it has these peaks coming up. You can see that little jiggle there. So this is what I want your meringue powder to look like when we whip it with the 5 tablespoons of warm water. So I'm just going to gently tap this into the bowl. We don't have to worry about scraping. That's just a little bit. That's not a big deal. So once we achieve the stiff peaks with our meringue powder, we're going to go right in with 8 cups of powdered sugar. All 8 cups are going to come into this bowl here. I don't sift my powdered sugar. I find that the lumps, they come out in the next step, so I don't take the time to do that. Okay, so here's my 8 cups of powdered sugar. Now your water content is going to change depending on a few different factors. If it's really humid in your kitchen, we're going to start off with less water, because royal icing, it absorbs the humidity in the room. So sometimes, you know, you want to put less water in there so that you don't have a runny product. So I usually start with 8 or 9. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 9 tablespoons. Now you don't want to over beat your royal icing. If you over mix your royal icing, you're going to have a lot of issues with your final product. We only want to whip it until it reaches a nice, smooth, marshmallowy texture. So I'm going to lower the motor head. We're going to start off really slow. Let that powdered sugar and water incorporate into the meringue mix that we already made. Now this is going to be a little thick. So watch how this mixes. If it looks extremely thick and it's not combining, then you can go ahead and add a little bit of water. So I always sit here with my water and just a couple drops at a time. We don't want to over water the royal icing. And I always make my royal icing to like an outline consistency. You want to keep it thicker because we're storing this at room temperature, and you know, if you're familiar with royal icing, you know that it separates as it's sitting there. So by keeping it thicker, it really delays that separation process. And by making my royal icing to like the outline consistency, I already have one consistency made. Now in the attached workbook, I go into greater detail over each one of these steps, explaining, you know, just to troubleshoot some common issues with royal icing. I'll go over, you know, why you don't want to over mix it. You don't want to over aerate it, you know, because then you have issues like it's not going to dry on your cookie properly. It's going to be very grainy, very porous, and it's just going to make for a poor product. So after I get that incorporated, now I'm going to take my spatula and I'm going to scrape down these sides. Sometimes there's, you know, a loose pocket of powdered sugar at the bottom. So we just want to loosen that up. And then we're going to put it back on our mixer, and then we're going to crank up the speed a little bit. And we just want to beat this until it has that nice smooth texture. There's some clumps in there currently, so we want to just get this fully incorporated. Okay, so I never usually go past like 30 seconds to a minute in that final step. It all comes together pretty nicely. Now here you can see our final product. So we have this nice, smooth, marshmallowy texture. It's thick, which is great because that's what we're looking for. You want to create that stability in your royal icing. And that's why whipping the meringue powder is key to making stable royal icing. So now you can see in the bowl, it's nice and thick, it's smooth. We're looking for like these soft peaks curling up off of the spatula. So it's thick enough to hold its form. So we have that peak. So that's what we're looking for in this final product. Everything's nicely incorporated. We have that marshmallowy smooth texture. And when we lift up our spatula, we have those nice peaks. Okay, so we do not want to let this air expose. As soon as you are finished, get your Tupperware. We're looking for something that's airtight, preferably something that has a clip lid top. This is my, hold on a second. This is my favorite Tupperware. I can fit 2 double batches of royal icing in here. I go through a lot of royal icing. I already made this batch, so we're just going to put this new one right on top. And once your royal icing is made, you can store it at room temperature for up to 2 weeks. I like to use my royal icing within a week. If you're going into that second week, I would throw it back into your mixer and just re-whip it. Because even if you do make a thick royal icing, it is going to separate. So we're just going to put that all on top here, and then we're going to follow up and make some, we're going to color some of our royal icing, and I'm going to go over some key consistencies. In this part of the video, I'm going to show you how to color, bag, and store your royal icing. So here on the table with me, I have my large container of royal icing, my caddy of food gel. I use Wilton brand and Hobby Lobby, my mixing bowls. I have my rubber spatula. I have my airtight containers. These are Betty Crocker. They have the twist lid. These work perfect when I'm coloring my royal icing. And I just keep those at room temperature on my counter. Here I have my water bottle. I never use measuring spoons to water down my royal icing. So if you're trying to achieve a flood or dip consistency, for any reason that you are putting water in your royal icing, you want to use a water bottle on mist mode. That little bit of mist goes a long way. Okay, I also have my little tumbler. So as I'm bagging icing, I like to take my piping bag and put it inside of the tumbler and open up the side, so this way it opens a nice large hole for me to get that royal icing in there without yucking up the sides. And I never knot the bags. I buy these clips from Walmart and they're color coded. So I put the black clips on my outline bag and the colored clips on my flood bag because I like my royal icing to be, I like the bag to be, you know, stiff and not loose. So I don't like to knot the bags because as I'm using the royal icing, the bag gets really loose. This way I can take these off, push the bag or the icing down into the bag and then re-clip them. Okay, so that's all my supplies for this part of the video. So we're going to start on the outline consistency. So I'm going to make some gray icing here. So I'm going to take my toothpick and just a little bit. When you're coloring your royal icing, you want to make your icing like one shade lighter than what it's intended to be, because as the icing is sitting on the counter, it's going to develop and saturate and it's going to get darker. So you never want to color until you achieve that deep color. You want to go a shade or two lighter so that it could process over time. So I always color my icing about a day or two before I intend to use it. Because if you know, let's say I want this to be black. If I keep putting the food gel in here until that is a deep black, I oversaturated it. And it essentially ruins the product because you're putting too much food gel in there. That changes the structure of the royal icing. And it's not going to dry. It's going to color bleed into other colors. It might be grainy and porous. So, you know, have a little patience and just let those colors sit and develop, especially when you need those deep, dark colors. Okay, so here I'm getting this gray nice and uniform in the bowl. Now I want this to be an outline consistency. A couple key things that I want you to look for. I'm going to mist just a little bit because it's starting to thicken up as I'm mixing it. So just one little mist. Okay, so what I'm looking for in my outline, you want it to be thick enough that it holds its shape, but loose enough that it flows nicely and just has a little bit of jiggle. Okay, so here you can see that it's thicker, and I still think it's a little bit too thick, so another pump of the mist. So I like a wet outline because when I'm doing details and I want a nice smooth detail, especially on like a thicker detail, I need that little bit of moisture to help it keep, you know, for it to smooth out. But I need it thick enough so that it doesn't spread like a flood would. Okay, so here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the soft peaks. When I lift it up, it curls over like that. If I jiggle the bowl, you can see it moving a little bit. So if I tap it, you can see that it's settling in on itself, but it still has these soft pinks. And then if I'm spreading through it, it's going to stay separated. But if I jiggle it, it's going to come back together. Maybe one more mist here. Okay, so we're jiggling, just a little bit of jiggle, soft curls, but when I separate it, it stays separated. Okay, so that's our outline. So what I'll do now is I will put this in my Tupperware and I'll sit it on the counter until I'm ready to use it. But for the sake of the video, I'm going to bag and then move on to the flood icing. So you don't need a lot of outline. A small bag goes a long way. So I'm really just taking one little scoop here and I'm going to plop it right into this bag. Now here's that scoop. Now what I want to do is I want to move this icing to the tip of the bag. So hold on to your bag here, and then I want you to helicopter it like this. Now what this is doing, it's moving that icing to the bottom of the bag, and it's also helping those air bubbles rise to the top so you have less bubbles in your icing. Okay, so here we have the icing down to the tip. Now I move all of this down, and then I rotate. And then because this is my outline bag, I use the black clip and close the bag. So here's my outline bag. Okay. So the rest of this icing, so let's say it's decorating day. I took that scoop out. Now whatever is left is going to be my flood. This way it's perfectly colored matched. Now I like my flood on the thicker side. So we're going to start with a couple pumps of the mist, and we're just going to mix this down. Scrape those sides. Now the reason why I like it thicker is because it has a more puffy texture and a more puffy look on the cookie. And also my cookies naturally dome slightly because I put baking powder in it. So if I have a really runny flood, that little bit of a dome shape to the cookie, it tends to run off the side. So I find that I have better control over a thick flood. But it's up to you, where you like your flood. Some people like a really thin flood. That works best for them. For me, I like a thicker flood. So there's a couple things that we're going to look for with the flood. We want movement in the bowl. If I'm separating it, I want it to start going back together. So here's the movement in the bowl. You can see it moving, but it's not rushing. It's not moving really quickly. It has enough fluidity in there that it's going to do its job on the cookie without being too wet. So here I'm separating, I'm running the spoon through, and see how it's closing in on itself? See how nice and slow? That's not rushing, so it's taking its time. So that tells me that when I'm flooding the cookie, it's going to be nice and even on the cookie. I'm not going to fight to get that flood nice and smooth on the cookie. Another tell, if I lift it up off of my spoon, you can see that kind of ribboning off the spoon. You want to make sure that you have some flow in your flood without it being, you know, too thick. I like mine right in the middle. And I find this important when I'm doing extremely detailed cookies. You know, cookies that have small sections. I don't like it to be too thin. I want that to hold its shape. So here I have my 10-inch tipless bag. I'm going to put that in this cup here. And then using my rubber spatula, I'm going to scrape down this icing and put it right in the bag. So again, we want to move the icing down to the tip of the bag. So make sure you have a good grip on the bag. We're going to helicopter this, get those bubbles out of the icing, and move that icing down the tip. So you can see that there's hardly any bubbles in here. And the icing is down into the tip. Now I like to just twist the bag. And this is my flood bag, so I'm going to get my colored clips and cinch this closed. So here I have my small outline bag with the black clip and my flood consistency in the colored clip. So they are perfectly colored matched, and I'm ready to decorate my cookies. The next consistency that I want to go through with you is dip consistency. Now this one is a little bit tricky. It took me a lot of trial and error to make this correctly. But I find that taking the time to learn this consistency is a huge time saver, especially when you are in the thick of the holidays and you have, you know, a shape that is completely flooded. By dipping it, you know, it only takes a couple seconds versus, you know, a minute or two to sit there and flood it. I always do frosted minis with the nonpareils. So by learning, that's why I really took the time to learn this consistency, because it is so quick for me to dip, sprinkle the nonpareils on there, and move on. So I could, you know, dip a couple hundred minis in, you know, just a short, you know, 2-3 hours versus spending all day on it. So a couple things with the dip consistency: you want it to be really thin, but not like water. So you want it to ribbon off the spoon pretty quickly. You want a lot of movement in the bowl, because when we dip, we put it face down, and then when we pull up, we want all that excess to come off. But we need it thick enough so that it stays on the cookie. So you can see it's a really, it's a balancing act. Another thing, because we are adding a lot of water and we're mixing this a lot, we're putting air bubbles in this. There's no way around it. So when I get this consistency right, I like to leave the bowl sit. I'll take a wet paper towel, put it on top of the bowl, and just let it sit and rest for a good half hour. All those air bubbles will come to the top, and then I can take my spatula and just graze the top of it and pop those air bubbles, because we don't want those in our cookies. So having that rest period is very beneficial when you are doing your dip consistency. Okay, so again, we're using that water bottle, a little bit of mist at a time. Okay, so here is what your dip consistency is going to look like. One, we got a lot of movement in that bowl. If I'm cutting through this, it's going back really quickly. But again, we don't want it to move as quick as water. We want just a little bit of thickness, just so that it stays on top of our cookie. Another tell, if I take a big scoop of this and lift it up, you can see how that's streaming right off the spoon? It didn't have a pause. You don't want that to have a pause, because if it does, then that means it's still too thick, and that extra icing is going to stay on the cookie, and it's going to be a very bumpy flood. So we want this to come straight off the spoon and lift in ribbons. Okay, so I want this to have a rest period. I'm going to take a wet paper towel and I'm going to place it right on top of this bowl. And the reason why you want a wet paper towel is you want it to stick to the bowl. If I were to just place the paper towel right on top of it, it's going to let air into the sides, and then it's going to crust and ruin our icing. So here's a wet paper towel. I'm going to drape it right across, and then I'm just going to push it down so that it sticks to the rim of the bowl. So you can see the bowl here. We're going to let this rest for a good 20 to 30 minutes, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you just how many air bubbles rise to the surface. Okay, in this section here, we are going to make stiff consistency icing. Now I need stiff black icing, so that's what we're going to use in this video here. So when you scoop out your royal icing for stiff, put in a little bit less than you need, because we're going to be adding a lot of powdered sugar to this, because we need this to be extremely stiff. So adding that powdered sugar is going to increase the volume. So I always scoop out a little bit less than what I need. And this is also another benefit of storing your royal icing at a thicker consistency, because now we don't have to add as much powdered sugar because it's already on the thicker side. So I don't want to mix this until it's true black and then add powdered sugar. I just mix it a little bit to start incorporating it, but then I start scooping in the powdered sugar. Now for me, I learned that whenever I think it's thick enough, I always put a little bit more in there, because, you know, I might think that it's thick enough, but sometimes it just still has that little bit of moisture, so I always put that little extra in there, and then it's usually perfect. So what we're looking for here is for this to combine. We want stiff royal icing. We don't want any movement in this icing. So this powdered sugar, it's absorbing that moisture and creating thick royal icing. Now the more powdered sugar you add into this, you're going to have to counter with a little bit of, you know, more food gel, because that white is going to soften up that color, and I need this to be black. Now again, we want this to develop over time, so I'm not going for true black here. I'm going for more of a charcoal black, and when I'm ready to use this in a day or two, that black is going to be more developed. And royal icing also dries darker, so whatever color you have in the bag, it's going to be darker when you get it on the cookie. Okay, so I'm using the back of my spoon just to get these lumps out of here. Make sure there's no lumps in here. We're scraping, getting all of that color in there. Now with the stiff consistency, I want stiff peaks. So let's scrape this down. Let's finish this off with the rubber spatula. So you can see how there's no movement. It's completely in the bowl. If I lift this up, those peaks are staying. They're sticking straight up. So there is very little moisture in there. You need the smallest touch of moisture just so that it could adhere to it, but it's a very minuscule amount. So we're looking for those stiff peaks. And the reason why we want this stiff peak is because with stiff consistencies, we're looking for a very particular shape. So here, I'm going to bag it with my Wilton 18 star tip. I'm going to be using this for a frame cookie. So when this pipes out of the star, I want that to retain that shape. Okay, so when I do stiff consistencies, I double bag. So what I do is I put the icing in the first bag here. And because these tipless bags are pretty thin, and this is really thick icing, when we squeeze, it's going to create a lot of pressure in this bag, and it's going to be prone to splitting. So I like to put the icing in the first bag. Again, we're doing that helicopter. Move all that icing to the, at least try to get the icing down into the tip. You can see how thick it is. It's struggling to get out there, but that's okay. So I have the icing in this bag. I'm going to take a second bag, drop the tip into the bottom of the bag. We're going to cut that open so that the tip is right at the bottom of the bag. And then what I want to do is I want to cut a pretty big hole so that it rests right inside of that tip in the second bag. So here I'm going to drop it in here. And now I have a double bag. And then that gives it extra protection from splitting. So with the stiff consistency, we already know that it's stiff because it has the tip here, but I do like to have a clip just to keep the bag closed. So I have these larger binder clips just to hold this in place. Okay, so just to give you a little preview of how this looks, I'm just going to do this right on my spatula, but we are going to make a little rosette. Okay. So you can see it held its shape. You see all these little ridges here. It's not going anywhere. It's locked on that spatula. And it has its shape. But there's just that little bit of moisture just for us to be able to pipe that. Okay, we are back with our dip bowl. It's been sitting and resting for a while now. So I'm going to peel this off and show you how many bubbles came to the surface. So you can see all of those bubbles. So I don't want to mix this vigorously because then we're just creating more bubbles. So what I do when I am doing my mini cookies, I have my bowl, I have a mug of lukewarm water, and I have a baby spatula. So what I do is just run this over the top. You can see those bubbles popping. We don't want to mix and create more bubbles, so we're just being really gentle here, popping those bubbles, because if there's bubbles on the top, then they're going to be bubbles in our cookie when we dip it. So you can see I popped all of those bubbles. Now, as you know with royal icing, it crusts when it's out in the air. So as we're dipping, you know, we're sitting here for a while. So that royal icing, it's going to be sitting in the air. It's going to start crusting, especially on the sides. So I like to leave this here, and every so many cookies, I'll just take this spatula and I'll just run it across the sides and kind of fold over the top just to refreshen and keep that crust from forming. Because this is very thin, so it's going to take a lot of air time for that to crust like a cookie would. So just run this on the sides, fold over the top, and then you have a nice, fresh bowl of icing without putting more air bubbles in it. So do you see the difference here? There's hardly any air bubbles. Now, because it's so thin, you're going to have air bubbles, but not as many as you saw when I first took that paper towel off. So for here, you know, you still see that movement. And now I'm ready to dip my cookies. Okay. And I always have some toothpicks on hand, you know, in case, or my scribe, you know, if there are air bubbles on the flood, you can just quickly pop it. But that is what our dip consistency looks like.